In the freezing, wind-scoured heart of the northern Ural Mountains, a desolate and jagged region the indigenous Mansi people had long since chillingly branded as Kholat Syakhl, the Mountain of the Dead, 9 vibrant, exceptionally experienced Soviet hikers marched directly into an abyss of unimaginable, lingering terror. Led by the brilliant and charismatic 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, this tightly knit group of student engineers and seasoned cross-country skiers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute embarked on what was envisioned as a rigorous Grade 3 winter expedition, a grueling trek designed to test the absolute limits of human endurance against the most punishing elements of the Siberian wilderness. By late January of 1959, the boundless frozen vastness had entirely swallowed them whole, severing every fragile thread connecting them to the warmth of civilization as they pushed deeper into an unforgiving, featureless white wasteland where the winter sun was nothing more than a pale, mocking ghost drowning in a leaden sky. These were not fragile amateurs easily rattled by the dark. They were tough, hyper-capable survivalists who thoroughly understood how to treat severe frostbite, how to accurately decipher the fickle, deadly moods of the mountain ridges, and how to expertly construct reinforced shelters against the most cataclysmic blizzards. Yet, as they deliberately pitched their heavy canvas tent on the exposed, completely barren slope of Kholat Syakhl on the fateful evening of February 1st, an oppressive, suffocating, and utterly unnatural dread began to seep through the frozen earth, settling over the camp like a heavy shroud designed to choke the very breath from their lungs. The final entries in their diaries and the candid photographs captured on their film rolls spoke of high spirits and camaraderie, but as the shadows lengthened, the mountain itself seemed to alter, emitting a low, malicious infrasonic vibration that subtly rattled the icy fabric of their shelter and plucked violently at the raw, frayed edges of their subconscious minds. Outside, the ambient temperature plummeted well below -30 degrees Celsius, and the wind howled like an agonizing choir of the damned, tearing viciously at the canvas ropes and burying the tent beneath shifting drifts of razor-sharp, crystalline snow. Inside the claustrophobic, dark interior of the tent, lit only by the dim, flickering glow of a single flashlight, the hikers settled down to sleep, entirely unaware that the absolute, pitch-black void of the Siberian night was closing in around them. Far from any hope of rescue, far from any human warmth, a monstrous, unseen presence began to encircle their fragile sanctuary, an all-consuming, malevolent force that warped the very atmosphere and induced a sudden, paralyzing wave of absolute, primal panic that instantly shattered their logical minds and overrode every single ounce of their extensive survival training, leaving them screaming in the dark. What transpired next in the suffocating darkness of that canvas tomb remains one of the most chilling, unholy mysteries in human history, a sudden descent into absolute madness triggered by an entity or event so profoundly horrifying that centuries of deeply ingrained human survival instincts were completely inverted in an instant. Sometime in the dead of night, as the helpless hikers lay trapped within their heavy sleeping bags, an acute, reality-shattering terror struck the very heart of the tent, a panic so violent and absolute that they did not even pause for a fraction of a second to unfasten the heavily knotted, frozen front exit. Instead, driven by a hysterical, breathless desperation to escape whatever unspeakable horror had just breached their sanctuary or loomed directly above them, they drew their sharp hunting knives and frantically slashed wide, ragged gashes directly through the thick canvas walls from the inside out, ripping their only shield against the elements into useless ribbons. Tumbling out into the screaming, sub-zero vortex of the Siberian night, the 9 terrified companions fled blindly down the rocky, ice-slick slope of the Mountain of the Dead, embarking on a suicidal, chaotic flight into a 30-mile-per-hour blizzard. They ran entirely barefoot across the razor-sharp ice, some wearing nothing but thin, tattered socks, others clad only in flimsy undergarments or single shirts, their bare skin instantly blackening, blistering, and cracking as the biting, sub-zero frost began its cruel, agonizing feast upon their exposed flesh. The sheer, paralyzing horror of whatever was pursuing them down that ridge, or whatever cosmic nightmare they were desperately trying to distance themselves from, was so monstrously overwhelming that the agonizing prospect of freezing to death in the pitch-black void was universally accepted as the preferable alternative to staying. They did not run in an organized fashion. They scattered into small, desperate clusters, stumbling blindly over hidden boulders and through deep, shifting snowdrifts in a mile-long plunge toward the edge of a dense, shadowy forest that offered no real protection, only deeper, swallowing shadows. The night was a hellish canvas of pure chaos, filled with the sickening sounds of snapping bone, ragged, desperate panting, and the wind-torn, hopeless shrieks of young people realizing that the very darkness around them had turned predatory. As they finally huddled together beneath the towering, skeletal branches of an ancient cedar tree at the forest's edge, their breath rapidly freezing into solid masks of ice upon their agonizingly pale faces, the freezing blackness offered absolutely no sanctuary, for the invisible, hunting nightmare that had driven them from their warm beds had silently followed them down the mountain, waiting patiently in the dark. Weeks later, when the grim Soviet search parties and military investigators finally breached the silent, snow-choked slopes of Kholat Syakhl, they uncovered a macabre theater of death that completely defied all known medical logic and plunged the hardened searchers into a state of profound, existential shock. The first grim discoveries were made at the very edge of the forest beneath the ancient cedar tree, where the frozen, half-naked corpses of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko lay side by side in the snow, their fingers violently shredded to the bone from a desperate, frantic attempt to claw their way up the rough, frozen bark, as if trying to escape a horrific entity that slithered or hunted on the snowy ground directly beneath them. Nearby, scattered along the desolate slope leading back toward the abandoned, tent, lay the rigid bodies of Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. Their frozen, petrified postures made it sickeningly clear that they had perished while attempting a desperate, agonizing crawl back toward their shelter, their stiffened hands outstretched against the ice as if pleading with the uncaring mountain for a mercy that never arrived. However, the true, mind-bending horror of the incident was not fully realized until nearly 3 months later, when the heavy spring thaw finally exposed the remaining 4 hikers buried deep within a dark, snow-filled ravine further inside the terrifying woods. When the medical examiners carefully peeled away the sodden, frozen clothing of these final victims, they confronted internal injuries that resembled a brutal execution carried out by an invisible, supernatural force of unfathomable magnitude. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol's skull had been completely crushed inward by a massive, catastrophic impact, while the chests of Semyon Zolotaryov and Lyudmila Dubinina had been violently imploded with such tremendous, unnatural pressure that their ribs were shattered into splintered shards, perfectly mimicking the lethal internal trauma of a high-speed, fatal car crash or an explosion. Yet, the most terrifying and inexplicable detail of all was that despite these fatal, massive internal fractures that had pulverized their bodies, there was absolutely no corresponding external tissue damage, no bruises, no cuts, and no lacerations on the pale skin overlying the shattered bones, as if an invisible, localized wave of pure, condensed kinetic force had effortlessly crushed their inner organs and skeletal structures from the inside out without ever breaking the surface of their freezing flesh. The seasoned military men who uncovered them wept openly, terrified by the unnatural silence of the ravine and the overwhelming sensation that they were trespassing on ground claimed by an ancient, predatory evil. The atmosphere around the bodies felt thick and poisoned, tainted by a lingering malevolence that made the investigators' skin crawl with the distinct, terrifying certainty that whatever had broken these 9 young lives was still hiding in the howling wind, watching their every move from the surrounding peaks. As the official autopsies commenced under the dim, flickering lights of a heavily guarded, isolated Soviet morgue, the horrors of Kholat Syakhl grew exponentially more grotesque and deeply haunting, cementing the incident as a true descent into cosmic, visceral terror. When the medical examiner meticulously inspected the frozen face of young Lyudmila Dubinina, he recoiled in pure, unadulterated horror to discover that her tongue had been violently ripped out from the very root while her heart was still beating, leaving her jaw gaping open in a permanent, silent scream over a hollow cavern of dried blood. Her eyes, along with the eyes of Semyon Zolotaryov, were entirely missing from their fractured skulls, cleanly and systematically extracted from their sockets to leave empty, bottomless black voids that stared blindly and accusingly into the flickering clinical lights of the room. Large portions of their facial tissues, lips, and eyebrows had been completely stripped away by an unknown force, exposing the grinning, pale white bone beneath, yet the surrounding snow bore absolutely no signs of animal footprints, scavenging, or predation, making the mutilations look like the deliberate, surgical, and ritualistic harvest of an otherworldly predator. Furthermore, the corpses exhibited a bizarre, deeply unnatural deep orange and brownish bronze discoloration that baffled the pathologists, and several of the young hikers' heads of hair had turned prematurely and completely gray within a matter of hours, a chilling physical testament to the absolute, heart-stopping terror they had experienced in their final, panicked moments on Earth. To deepen the supernatural dread surrounding the case, subsequent radiological testing revealed that the tattered, frozen clothing of the victims was intensely radioactive, emitting an invisible, silent poison that defied any logical or scientific explanation for a group of civilian hikers traveling through the remote wilderness. Terrified by these unholy, unexplainable findings and utterly unable to construct a rational narrative that wouldn't incite widespread panic, the Soviet authorities abruptly and quietly shut down the entire investigation, sealing the official files away from the public eye under a heavy shroud of extreme state secrecy and lamely attributing the horrific tragedy to an ominous, undefined, compelling natural force. Decades later, the infamous Dyatlov Pass remains a cursed, silent grave of eternal ice and jagged shadow, a place where the final, desperate screams of 9 slaughtered youths are forever trapped within the howling Siberian wind, serving as a chilling warning that some nightmares cannot be explained by science, and they wait patiently in the dead of night for the living to trespass.